Today on Family Talk.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm James Dobson, and you're listening to Family Talk. And we've interrupted our regularly scheduled program today to offer a special tribute to the 41st President of the United States, George Herbert Walker Bush. Let me read a short tribute that I wrote to him a day or two after he died on November the 30th of this year. I said, "It is with sadness that Shirley and I have learned of the passing of former President George Herbert Walker Bush. He was one of the finest, one of the most generous men I have ever known. I met him when he was a vice president under President Ronald Reagan. Mr. Bush invited me at that time to his office in the Eisenhower Building in May of 1988. 1 month later, my mother died suddenly. Despite our casual acquaintance, the vice president took the time to write me a handwritten personal letter of consolation at our loss. That grew into a casual friendship when I became only one of millions of others around the world who considered President Bush to be their friend. When he was nominated by his party in 1992, he called for America to be a softer, gentler nation. There can be no more accurate words with which to characterize this good man. He genuinely cared about people and led our nation through perilous times. We will miss him and send our love and prayers to President George W. Bush and his entire family." You can tell from my reading of those words that I had the highest respect and appreciation for President George Herbert Walker Bush. When he was a candidate for the second time against Bill Clinton, Mr. Bush came to visit us at Focus on the Family. We went up together to my office, and the two of us sat and prayed together. Then he came down to our studio, and we recorded an interview that I want to share with you because it tells you a little bit about what he believed. Join us now as we listen to that recording. Mr. President, thank you for coming by. I do appreciate that.
Well, I am very pleased to be here. I have only one regret, and that is that Barbara Bush isn't with us, doesn't get to meet your people.
Mr. President, much has been written about the so-called vision thing. What is your desire for the American people?
Let me put it in perspective. You see, I still believe we are a good and decent society, and overriding all of these specific programmatic objections is the need to strengthen the American family. And Dr. Dobson, it's not because I'm sitting here. It is something I feel passionately about. It's something I've appointed a commission to address in terms of urban family disintegration. And we must get back to our values that underlie and have always strengthened our society. All of this we can make progress on. None of it can be done in 4 years, but that's what passionately drives my desire to finish the job.
Shirley and I, my wife and I, just got back from 6 weeks in Edinburgh, Scotland. I was very interested in the press there and how they see the American way of life and particularly the American campaign. And right before I left, the London Times, there in London, July 20th, 1992, had an editorial called The Un-American Inactivity. And if you'll pardon me, let me read you 2 paragraphs from that, and then I'd like you to comment on it. They said, "There is something pathetic in the spectacle of American politicians appealing to traditional family values in the name of American youth, when the values appear to be dying out and the young are emphatically not listening. 2 surveys were published last week, which together paint a portrait of a generation of American youth that is lost, fractured, and dangerously alienated from the political process. The first, from the Times Mirror Center, found that only about a quarter of eligible Americans under 35 are likely to vote in the autumn election. The second, from the National Center for Health Statistics, showed that fewer young Americans are marrying than ever before, suggesting that the traditional American family may soon be an anachronism." You believe that?
Well, I believe parts of it. I am not all that discouraged about American youth. I think we're going to see higher participation in the election. That's a detail there. But I'll tell you, I share the concerns of that editor about the undermining of the family. The mayors came to see me, mayors from the National League of Cities, and they said the largest single cause of urban decay is the decline of the American family. And so what we are trying to do, and you can't do this by government mandate, is find ways to strengthen it. And then what Barbara and I have tried to do, and I certainly give her great credit on this, is to exemplify our commitment to family values. For example, when she reads to children, she's big into literacy.
Yes.
It sends a signal that parents should read to their kids. Now, that's not a government program, but it's a government exhortation. So he may be right on some of these statistics, probably and regrettably is, but the answer is not to wring our hands about it. The answer is to try to change it. And that's why I appointed this family commission, a commission on urban families under the great Governor Ashcroft of Missouri and co-chaired by Annette Strauss, a former mayor of Dallas, to try to find ways legislatively to strengthen the family. Welfare reform is a part of that.
Let me turn a corner and express appreciation to you, Mr. President, for the Attorney General and his office continuing to pursue hardcore pornography in this country. Your administration has really delivered on that issue, and on behalf of many, many people who listen to this broadcast, I want to express appreciation to you.
Well, it's a sickness out there when people can get rich or in any way profit by this insidious pornographic perpetuation. It's a terrible thing. And we've faced it in various ways. Thank you for saluting the Justice Department. They have done more to bring to justice those people that are putrefying the lives of the young people in this country than any previous administration. We've had some rows on the National Endowment for the Arts because that organization, in my view, at some times went over the bounds of common decency, particularly when they ridiculed, if I can be specific, Jesus Christ, when they advocated funding certain art presentations, the most vile kinds of sexual orientation. And it's not easy to come to grips with that. I don't believe in censorship. I do believe in decency. And we've tried to stand for decency. And we have a regime there now that I think stands for decency and honor. And it's a very difficult one. But it's not just justice. And it's not just NEA. All across the board, we are trying very hard to strengthen family values, and that would mean standing up against this insidious pornography.
For our team, the issue is not censorship, it's sponsorship. It's using taxpayer money to insult Christians, to insult the sensibilities of decent people.
We've got to be against bigotry and obscenity, and I hope our administration, where there may be some weaknesses here and there, has stood against those kinds of things because they do smack at the very fabric of families in this country. And we ought not to condone those things which clearly should be condemned.
Let's talk again about abortion. You have consistently, in fact, I heard a speech that you gave to a Catholic assembly just a few days ago.
The Knights of Columbus meeting in New York.
Where you said that this was an expression of a deeply held belief within you, the opposition to abortion on demand. Would you reiterate?
Well, let me say this, that this is a tremendously divisive issue. But I don't care what the polls say, and I am not going to change position based on the polls. I am strongly on the pro-life side. And I have shown that and demonstrated it by vetoing bill after bill that's been sent down. And the more I think of it, the more convinced I become instead of going the other way on it. And it's a tragedy, 1.5 million abortions, and there's got to be a better way. And I think I know what it is. It's adoption, it's abstinence, it's the family teaching the young people, whether it's single parent or two parents, that it's wrong to engage in the practices that result in these horrible increase in abortions. And let me add one other thing. I used the example in that speech and I'm sure it's accurate, that to get your ears pierced, if you're a 13-year-old girl, you have to have parental consent in some states. I know it was given to me as true in Pennsylvania. But to get an abortion, some suggest you shouldn't even have to consult the parents. I'm sorry. I just think that is wrong. I believe it's immoral. And so I will fight for what I believe.
You can't give an aspirin to another parent's child without being charged with battery if they don't like it, or bind a scratch. And yet, parents who have held the absolute responsibility for the medical care of their children for 300 years in this country have now lost control of their minors. A 13-year-old girl can have this procedure that she will remember for the rest of her life. It just isn't right. And that is not a political stance with you. That is a deeply held moral
It is a deeply held conviction, and it's not going to change. And as I say, a president has to make a lot of decisions. Some of them may be popular, some may be unpopular. But I've found you can't make a decision based on popularity or on surveys. You simply can't do it. You got to say, here's what I'm for, and I'm going to stand for it. Here's what I'm against. I don't want to change the subject, but I go back to the war in the Gulf. Everyone says you don't have the American people with you on this one. You don't have the Congress with you on it. And I had to lead and say, here's what we're going to have to do. Now here's what I'm going to do, and bring the people on board. And I feel the same way on these social issues. But I'm going to continue to stand for what I believe.
Mr. President, what do you want to say to our listeners?
Listen, I don't think you have enough time on this marvelous program of yours to let me start unwinding on that. Maybe it ought to be this. Do not let the critics make you believe that in spite of the problems we've talked about here, that we're a nation in decline. We're a great nation. In many ways, we're the envy of the world, even with tough economic times. Our economy is greater and stronger than most of the Western European economies today. We are a country that can do what we set out to do. Now we've got to be sure we change the way we do it. And that's why I favor choice in child care. That's why I favor parental choice in education. That's why I favor getting these problems solved as much as possible at the family, the local, the community, and the state level. And do not despair about America. We are not in decline. We simply need to take and change things for the better. So stay involved and practice participation in helping others. You know, I call it points of light, but it is the age-old concept that de Tocqueville found when he came to this country of one American helping another. And we're a generous country. We're a friendly country. We're fair and honorable and decent, and I don't like to see our country torn down. I don't like to see it ripped asunder by some of these cultural values, and I think we got to get together as a nation, pull together, recognize our decency, and then fight for it.
Are you aware that millions of parents in this country are terrified right now about what's happening to the culture and especially the influences that are on their kids?
Yes, they are, and I think that they ought to involve themselves in the political process. You read me a story talking about predicted failed participation by young people. How about by adults? Are they all going to go out there and roll up their sleeves and do what Americans have the right to do? Demand of the people that they vote for, regardless of party, that they stand with them on what we call traditional family values.
I can't let you leave, Mr. President, without talking about the GI Bill for children that your administration is supporting. Explain it very quickly, and especially with reference to the individual choice by the parent as to which school a child would be able to go to.
Let me frame it for you. When I got out of the Navy in 1945, I was 20, maybe 21, and the war had just ended, World War II. The GI Bill was passed. That GI Bill gave to me a certain amount of money to go to the college of my choice. The government didn't say, you got to go to a state university. They said you can go to the college of your choice, parochial, private, public, whatever.
Christian.
principle,
you could go to a
you can
religious
go to a
school.
religious school.
And there was no
And many
church
did.
state
No
confusion.
church-state confusion. Nobody raised the constitutional argument. Nobody said this is wrong. And what happened was all institutions benefited by that program. I believe the state institutions, the private, the religious, all were chosen by some, and I think it helped. I know it helped the young people that benefited from that. Shift the gear to now. I believe that parents should have the choice or have an assistance in getting to accomplish that choice in public schools, if they want to choose it, benefit that one by a voucher, but also private and religious schools. Same principle we have for child care, really, that the parents know best, the parents can choose, or the kids in this case would benefit. And I think the time has come to say, look, our educational system isn't measuring up. Let's try the GI Bill for kids that says we're going to give parents a voucher and let them choose. And Dr. Dobson, I am convinced that one beneficiary of this will be the public schools, because it's been shown in Rochester and other places where it's been tried just on public schools that the school not chosen betters itself. So I will take on the powerful unions on this and let them come after me.
National
Yes,
Education Association,
I will go after
they're
them.
fighting you tooth and nail
They're
on
fighting
this.
me tooth and nail, but they can get in line. A lot of other special interests are fighting me. And I've now got to say to the American people, I need your help to do something that's different, but something that is right. Let the parents, let the families choose.
How can people pray for you, regardless of the political persuasion? And I know that people out there pray for our leaders. And how can they pray for you?
I would simply ask the prayers of people, not in a partisan sense, maybe not even in winning an election that I think has a lot to do about the direction of our country, but the president as president. Lincoln went to his knees a lot in that wonderful White House in which I'm privileged to live. And I understand that better now, because I don't believe that an atheist could be president of the United States. I don't honestly believe in my heart that if a person didn't have faith and didn't get strength from a supreme being, that person could serve as president. And so I would simply invite the prayers for the president of this country, and then I'll sort of out all the politics and go through the long political campaign. But we're a very special country. We're a very stable country. Our values, our national values are sound. And so I would pray for the president as president and hope that he can profit by the strength that God gives us. And that's all I'd ask.
Mr. President, thank you for being our guest, for coming by, and our prayers will be with you.
Well, I believe in prayer, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, sir.
Well, that was the way the interview with George Herbert Walker Bush ended. But afterward, we continued to talk, and the engineer left the mics on. So I want you to hear just a minute or two of the conversation that occurred after both of us thought the interview was over. From a distance, it appeared during the Gulf War that you were very moved emotionally to have to send those men into battle.
Oh.
And then your own illness occurred fairly close to that in time frame, didn't it?
I don't think there was any connection. I mean,
no, I didn't mean that, but I mean the
there was,
time frame, the emotional impact of those two things was fairly close together, as I recall.
Well, the emotional impact of the first was much greater than the second, because it really did. I sat up there with tears streaming down my face at Camp David the day before I knew these kids were going to start the air war. You know, you have to feel a responsibility. It's somebody else's son, somebody else's daughter that's going to be in harm's way in one way or another in this modern Army and Navy and Marines, et cetera, of ours. And it was, I remember being at our little chapel at Camp David, and I was very moved by it emotionally, and it drains it. And then we'd hear his letter. I mean, the first Navy pilot shot down. His wife was so heroic, and our children knew their dad did the right thing. guy was killed. I mean, all those things I took very personally.
You couldn't help but do it. You gave the order.
Yeah.
And yet more would have died if you
Now
hadn't,
we
I
hear
think.
all this macho talk out there from people that I looked over my shoulder looking, where are these congressmen and where are all these people, and I couldn't find them. And I don't question their patriotism, but there was a lot of people, well, I'll be there if it works out all right. And in the presidency, you can't do that. Hey, sometimes you make a call that people don't like, and sometimes you do what proves to be right, but you have to make the decision yourself.
Well, that was a very special day at Focus on the Family when President Bush joined us in our studios. I had many other occasions to meet with him, mostly in the White House. There was one occasion where I was alone with him. He had dismissed all of his staff, and we sat and talked about family values and principles that we both believed in. The media attacked this man like it does with every conservative president, usually those that have an R after their name. This man, who was a war hero in the South Pacific, and he was the youngest fighter pilot, was shot down by the Japanese while he was flying his plane. 2 of his men died in that battle, which affected him greatly, and he managed to parachute that day and was picked up by a submarine. I've seen a black and white film of George Bush coming out of the water on that day. Yet how did the media describe him during his second bid for the presidency? They said he was a wimp, and his administration was characterized by what they call the wimp factor. I want to close with a video that President Bush sent to me on my 60th birthday. We shared it with our staff. Here is an audio version of that greeting.
Well, I want to get in line. I want to get in line to take this occasion to congratulate him and thank him for doing the Lord's work in such a wonderful way. James, you have my respect. I hope you know that. I consider you a friend, and I treasure that. But I don't know that you know how much I value your ministry and the way it's reached out to so many people.
President Bush was a very transparent and a passionate man, and he did feel deeply about his time as a leader in war times because many men were killed, and he felt the responsibility of that. President Bush also had a good sense of humor. I remember being invited to the Oval Office to deliver a wonderful painting as a gift to him, and the setting for that painting was the front of the White House about, I would guess, 1870. And horses were bringing a guest to the front of the White House on a very cold, wintry day. And I gave the president that painting, and it hangs today in the Presidential Library. But when I walked into the Oval Office that day, I noticed that the Bush's Cocker Spaniel, Millie, I think Mrs. Bush wrote a book about Millie, but she was lying over by the window. And after greeting me, the president walked over to Millie and spoke to her, but she didn't move. She rolled her eyes up to him, but obviously she was upset. And I said, "What's wrong with her?" And he said, "Well, the grandkids are here and she's pouting. She always gets ticked when they come to the White House." What a great family and what a great man. So President George Herbert Walker Bush has now left us, but his memory will last in perpetuity. To the Bush family, we extend our love and prayers.
This has been a presentation of the Dr. James Dobson Family Institute.
The year was 1991, and the Iraqi army had invaded the defenseless country of Kuwait. President George Bush demanded repeatedly that Saddam Hussein withdraw his troops, but he refused to comply. So on January 17th, a massive invasion was launched. And what was the first objective of the attack? Well, you and I might have targeted missile sites or ammunition dumps or maybe even an officer's quarters. But the generals in charge of the UN effort had a different plan.
They knew how to cripple a fighting force. So with the first wave of stealth bombers, they took out the enemy's communication network. In so doing, they shut down the Iraqis' ability to talk to their generals, to coordinate their plans. And within weeks, of course, the war was over. Now that same dynamic holds true for homes, too. The quickest way to destroy a family is to cause a breakdown in communication. Create a barrier between father and son, mother and daughter, or husband and wife. It won't be long before they drift apart. Emotionally and organizationally, they'll soon be dysfunctional. Don't let that happen in your family. Work hard at keeping the lines of dialogue open and clear. And when you sense a closed spirit developing in a child or a spouse, don't let another day go by without bringing hidden feelings out in the open. It's the first principle of healthy family life.
To find out how you can partner with Family Talk, go to drjamesdobson.org.